Meeting is called to order, and I'd like to ask the city clerk to please call the roll.
All council members are present.
Would you all please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a brief moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The city clerk posted orders of adjournment of the October 12th, 2021 meeting and the agenda of the October 26th, 2021 meeting in accordance with state law, council, and housing authority policy. We have one presentation on today's agenda, and I'd like to invite Director of Parks and Recreation, Mr. Frank Carson, to come down and tell us about this.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Council. So this Friday, we've had a small break from it, but we're bringing back HauntFest this Friday. It's going to be from 4 to 9 p.m. We're pretty excited about actually offering this to our community again. We've done probably about 70% of the marketing that we normally do, and that's just to try to limit the event footprint on the amount of people that do attend. We are estimating that at any given time, about 8,000 attendees will be at the event. That was our target in our marketing strategies. We do have a new time this year, so 4 to 9 p.m. As in previous years, it was 5 to 10 p.m., but we want to make it a little bit more family friendly, so we're going to start an hour earlier and end an hour earlier just to test it out. I always like to include this image. This is from HauntFest 2017. And I got to sit in the eye in the sky, the police thing that elevates up, and take the photo. And this is actually at the costume contest stage. So if you want to know the busiest area of HauntFest, it's usually at the costume contest stage for several reasons, and I'll talk about that. As always, there's free entertainment, free activities. We had some paid things like food you do have to pay for, but many things at HauntFest are free. So once again, we do have the new time, and as you can see here, we have a reptile petting zoo that's coming back. Coming to this event is quite a great experience just to be a people watcher. You see so many people with different costumes. So the middle one, I believe she won our adult costume contest a few years back also. And then, of course, the Downtown Oakland Business Partners always puts on a great show. This year, they're going to have The Verge playing at 6:30 p.m. They're going to have stand-up comics, and then they're also providing walking zombie show throughout the event. So we're looking forward to Downtown Oakland Business Partners partnering with us, or collaborating with us, I should say, and making this event so special. I do want to highlight our HauntFest costume contest, mostly because it is a widely attended contest, and we have different ages attending at different times, our time frames. I know Councilmember Kendrick has sat in this many times, and many of you are offering to also be judges this year. But probably the busiest time is the 18 plus. You would think that maybe the 0 to 7, because a lot of the little kids will come out, but adults are into this also, big time. The Downtown Oakland Business Partners also offers cash prizes. Our total of cash prizes is $900 in total for this event. So we are grateful for the Downtown Oakland Business Partners also providing that. Some of our activities, I didn't list them all up here, but there will be amusement rides. There will be a movie in the park. So the theme of this year, and I have a shirt here, the front and then the back, and I'll give you a hint. It's 101 Dalmatians, but it's Cruella is the theme. So we're trying to do all of our branding this year around that type of Cruella theme, red, black, and white. We'll have free face painting, free mazes. There will be some craft vendors, some food vendors, and I did mention the Verge. Here at the Centennial Plaza, we're going to have 35 Alive, that DJ that does light it up. I mean, he lights it up big time. He brings in a crowd just himself. We could have HauntFest just surrounding him. Just that's how magnetic he is. So once again, we as a city are looking forward to offering this event to our community. We're hoping for a very good and safe showing this Friday. Thank you.
I'm excited to have it back.
Thank you.
Thanks for, what did you bring us, sir?
Oh, I just brought the shirt as an example. This is the volunteer shirts for this year.
So you came up and you showed us the shirt, but you didn't bring us one. Okay.
I did not.
That's all right, Frank.
You can volunteer, Mayor, and get a shirt.
There you go. He put me in my place. So there. Thanks. All right. That brings us to agenda changes. Staff, do you have any agenda changes?
Mr. Mayor, no changes to the agenda.
Council members? We're now at consent items. Consent items are routine matters enacted by one motion according to the recommendation listed below. With the concurrence of the City Council, a council member or person in attendance may request discussion of a consent item at this time. Council members, do you wish to pull any of the consent items? Staff?
No, sir.
I'd like to make a motion then to approve the consent items. Please vote.
Mayor, do you want to ask the city clerk if there are any requests for consent?
I did, but
Okay.
I forgot. So,
We have no comments, sir.
okay. Then my motion and second still stands. Please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
Great. Thank you very much. Angela even put it in big letters and highlighted it and sorry. Okay, public comment. At this time, any person may address a matter within the jurisdiction of the City Council, Housing Authority, successor agency to the El Cajon Redevelopment Agency that is not on the agenda. Comments relating to items on today's agenda are to be taken at the time the item is heard. State law prohibits discussion or action on items not on the agenda. However, City Council and Housing Authority members may briefly respond to statements or questions. And, of course, an item may be placed on a future agenda. Angela, do we have any speaker cards for this?
We received no comments, sir.
Okay. Then we're out written communications. There are no written communications on today's agenda. There are no public hearings on today's agenda. We have 3 administrative reports. Item 9 is an update on El Cajon 2.0. And I'd like to ask staff to tell us about this, please.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Jay Santos and Sarah Diaz from our IT department are going to present this topic.
Hello, Jay. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council members. My name is Jay Santos. I'm the IT Network Administrator for the City of El Cajon. I'm here to tell you about El Cajon 2.0, Force Request Innovation titled Technology as a Public Safety Force Multiplier. In July 2021, the city issued a request for innovation. A requested innovation includes pilot programs to maximize the effectiveness of the existing police department staff. It consists of a proposal of different technologies, such as drones, sensors, and artificial intelligence that will improve response calls, be alerted when a crime has been committed in public space, or aid in investigation reported crimes. As a result, the city receives 10 proposals from different innovative vendors. There were more than 20 different technologies from innovative vendors were proposed, from smart sensors, solar power, license plate readers, smart surveillance, behavior profiling, real-time location tracking, presence detection, speech detection, private 5G network, smart lighting, electric vehicle charging, smart parking, smart waste management, smart kiosks, smart traffic management, gunshot detection. These are other types of technologies that improve efficiencies. These are data consolidation tools, remote operation of drones, law enforcement data analysis, enterprise records management, field-based reporting, electronic citation software, officer accountability software, and citizens' engagement through smartphone device. The City Committee evaluated all these proposed technologies based on the 7 sections, and these are the project overview, stage of development, deploy plan, technical specification, business model, self-evaluation, and legal framework. I will turn it to Sarah for details of recommendations of selected innovative vendors.
Thank you, Sarah Diaz, Director of IT. So as you can see, we had got amazing response from this RFI. And as staff was going through this, looking for synergies with our police operations and how they stand, what we found was some proposals and some technologies rose to the top, which is really what we were hoping to find here. At this point, staff is recommending that we move forward with discussions potentially with Motorola Solutions, Qualcomm, Radix, and Tyler Technologies. They had the top 4 proposals, and they were focusing on various technologies that we think really could make a difference in our police department. Those include video management systems that incorporate artificial intelligence and machine learning, the remote launching of drones. You've heard recently at some of the council meetings about the amazing things that the police department wants to do with drones. And one of the proposals includes technology that could really help us take that to the next level. Solar-powered LPR on city sites to really take some of the personalization and the manual data entry that we use for billing at our public works yard. Electronic data consolidation, we got 2 different proposals that are really intriguing to us. And then electronic citations. Citations are when our friendly police officer visits us with, for the last 50, 60 years, they've had that really cool book with all the pages, and you get the yellow copy. We want to put that onto a phone, because we think that we can make the interaction friendlier, reduce data entry, be able to schedule court dates easier, and get the people on with their day a whole lot faster, and really minimize that impact of the ticket. We think it would be good for both the police officers, the courts, as well as the citizens receiving the tickets. So these are the technologies that we think really resonate with our staff. Where we want to go from this in the El Cajon 2.0 format is the idea of a pilot. And we had an amazing opportunity with one of these vendors. Radix offered us a free limited time trial of their Nighthawk Leo Vision software. And to kind of set the page for what this is doing, this is one of those data consolidation tools. So when there's an investigation, it used to be you went out, you talked to people, you gathered up the evidence, maybe you did a few search warrants for some basic phone records or things like that. With cell phones and social media, that process has exploded. We're now looking at hundreds of thousands of pages in returns when investigators request through search warrants, social media posts, cell phone data, and so forth. And what we're finding is the data is getting so big that sitting down and reading it and actually having the brain power to make connections is getting inefficient. It's beyond inefficient. In a recent case prior to July, we were looking at 4 investigators personally read 100,000 pages of social media posts for 5 separate individuals. It took them 350 hours. And the problem is when you've got 4 different investigators, maybe investigator A read something and maybe D read something, and there's a connection lost there unless both of them happen to highlight and kind of trigger on the same thing. What Nighthawk does is you take that information, you upload it into the computer, and it does a link analysis. It looks for commonality. It looks at who talked to who. And what that does is it then highlights those connections, so our investigators are focusing on analysis and how this fits in with their crime instead of just reading through, hey, pick up milk and whatever is in your text messages. That has nothing to do with it. So what we're seeing is the return on investment with this is just phenomenal, going from 350 hours to 20 pays for the software just in one case, and we've already used it on 11 cases since July. In talking to the investigators, what we've found is it's not just the individual cases that are speeding up. What we're finding is linkages between cases. So Nighthawk was able to find a link between multiple homicide cases that referenced a street name in a text here and a text there, and we were able to kind of find between Nighthawk and the investigator's knowledge of the case, we're able to make some connections that we would have missed in just reading through this. GPS data, Nighthawk was able to show suspects at the scene of a crime, huge. We also were able to find connections in several burglary cases that we weren't aware of. So this is bringing through and really taking that analysis to the next level, and it's a great way to use our officers to solve crime. This is a perfect example of what we want to see in an El Cajon 2.0 pilot. We want it to have a limited scope, and we want to see metrics out of it that really say, is this technology a game changer? Nighthawk, we were able to do that. We were able to quickly implement. We were able to implement for free. Not all of these pilots that are offered are for free, but we were able to get metrics and be able to make a solid recommendation from it. So the next steps for the El Cajon 2.0 committee, after we kind of get the input from you guys, is then to go back to these vendors and really dial in the scope of the pilots, what we want to do. Some of them propose multiple technologies. Let's zero in on the technologies that really we think matter to us, and then start working on figuring out these pilots, getting them going so that we can evaluate them before the next budget process. So what we're looking for from council is, does council wish to add or remove any of the proposals or technologies from this recommended list? And that's what we're looking for right now. And myself, Jay, we're available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Michelle, go ahead.
All right. So the first one I'm asking, in my understanding, we want to use all four of the top four bidders.
We want to explore with the top four bidders.
Okay.
There is more work to do to see if there is a solid fit. But what we are looking to do once we understand how this council would like us to proceed is to really sit down with each of them and figure out the details, make sure this makes sense, figure out the timelines and the costs and so forth.
Okay, because I'm looking here, and it seems like each bidding company has a different scope of what they can do. Mm-hmm. And all of them sound wonderful, so I'm thinking, oh, well, let's see what we can do to get all four of them, because they can be utilized, in various parts of the city. But then what are we looking at as far as cost go? And I don't know if that's something we can talk about now.
So what we're hoping to do is figure that out. The RFI limits the pilots at $25,000 per proposal. So that has to do with our purchasing thresholds. That's a level that we can do a single vendor, but we're looking to do that for a short period of time and not a long-term contract as far as pilots go. The definition of a pilot is we test it, we evaluate it, and then we decide what to do long-term.
So just to be clear, if we were to do a pilot from each of these, each one would be $25,000.
Up to $25,000.
Up to 25.
Like Radix's was free. So
Okay.
we've already knocked $25,000 off there.
Okay. And then do we have federal funds that can be used for this?
So we are looking at grant funding and federal funds, but we're trying, some of that is making sure that it fits within the scopes of those grants, because as you know, federal funds have lots of strings attached. But that, I think, is a good place to start. If we don't find a fit, then we would have to come back to you because it would be a budget issue.
Okay, it looks great, and I'm really excited to see how some of these others perform. Nighthawk seems to be a winner, so I'd be interested to see how the others perform, but thank you. Good presentation.
Thank you.
More questions? Steve, go ahead.
I will direct the questions to Sarah, but they may be something that the police need to answer. First of all, for funding, didn't we set aside ARPA funds for these projects?
We do have some ARPA funding for some of these types of projects, but as Ms. Diaz said, there are a lot of reporting strings attached with ARPA money, and so some of that may preclude some of these pilot programs from moving forward.
Okay.
But we do have some funding set aside for that, for some of this type of stuff.
Okay. Remote launching of drones. I kind of need to wrap myself around that because I'm picturing somebody with a remote launching module in their hands. Does this mean that you don't see the drone when you launch it, and don't they have to be line of sight still? What's going on with that?
They do. So they're talking about drones as a first responder program, and I think Lieutenant Randy Soulard breached on that topic briefly in here before, and when he gave his drone presentation. So essentially, it is with our certifications through the FAA, we have to remain line of sight. So we would have somebody on a roof monitoring that line of sight, and then a pilot for the drone. But yeah, it's the concept of launching a drone to respond to a call for service.
And how is that different than what you do today?
Currently, we're not doing that program because of staffing considerations and software considerations. We don't have the infrastructure for it today.
And this would provide that infrastructure, this software?
It would provide more capability in that realm. Yeah.
Capability. All right, I'll trust you on that one. Privacy. The public is often concerned about privacy. When we talk about drones, license plate readers, in the presentation it said that Nighthawk was able to look at text messages. I would assume that things like social media would be publicly available. I can look on different things. I wouldn't expect text messages. In that instance, was that from a publicly available source? Was that part of an investigation?
It would have been part of an investigation, and it would have been gleaned from a search warrant.
And so a warrant would have been obtained.
Correct.
Okay. Again, the privacy thing, the public would not expect that their text messages are automatically available for
No.
software analysis. It'd be part of a court-ordered investigation.
Correct.
Sounds good. Okay, that's all for you. Thanks, Chief. Sarah, I think the last thing I have to say is as you go forward with these things, the closer you get to something that you want to do, consider now your base measurement period. If you're thinking, we want to be here at 10 calls per something, where are we at today? 5 calls, so that way we know what the improvement is. If we forget to measure it now or how to organize how we are going to measure it, then it's too late once you finally get to the test period. So I'd say as you think of things you want to pilot, define your base period and measure that so that we know what the improvement is.
Absolutely. If, for example, with Nighthawk, we looked at costs to read a page based on the price of an investigator, a fully burdened cost. And so that was one of the metrics we looked at is how much does it cost in just staffing time now, and what's the cost per page going forward with Nighthawk? So we looked at that. We looked at hours. So we want to make sure that the metrics match the need. So in this case, it was investigators spending too much time reading this when they could be connecting the dots. So that absolutely, that's great advice, and thank you.
Question for our police chief. If you had a wish list, would all these things be on it? I mean, just any comments. I mean, you're an integral part of this. I'm not as informed about public safety as you are. I consider you the expert. So,
yeah, I think it's a good start to start looking into these programs more and seeing what they have to offer. I mean, certainly the idea of doing pilot programs is ideal because we're not spending a lot of money on them. So some of these concepts will flesh out and some of them will not. So I think this is a good start to at least start the conversations about what will work for our community.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks. All my questions were already answered. My concerns are the same as Steve's. All these programs have really great potential, but they also have great potential for abuse. So we just have to be above reproach on these things, which I know we always are. So thank you.
So we're not looking for a vote on this item. Is there any change to our recommendations that we should consider?
I'm not asking for any changes. Anybody else?
I'm good.
I think you're set. You're going in the right direction.
Thank you so much.
The next administrative report, item 10, is a legislative update, and I'll ask our city manager, Mr. DiMaggio, to give us all the really good news.
Well, I managed to reduce this from what you're used to seeing, which was 4 or 5 pages. You should take that as a sign of somewhat good news, because I just took off everything that didn't make it through the process. But there are 2 full pages of things, and I won't go through all of them. I'll just go through the ones that we need to focus on. The first, I apologize, SB 10 I wanted to put on here, and formatting or whatever, it fell off, so I apologize for that. But essentially SB 10 did get signed by the governor, but it does require a city council to adopt an enabling ordinance, and that enabling ordinance would allow ministerially 10 residential units on any residential parcel, regardless of the underlying zoning or general plan designation. Now, the reason why this is not one of those mandates is because it does require the initial action from the city council. So you guys did retain some authority in order to do this. So we don't see that happening here in El Cajon, so I'm not going to worry about it all that much. The next one I wanted to touch on is AB 333. This removes burglary, looting, felony vandalism, etc. from the list of crimes that are considered criminal gang activity. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I've reported on this before. It seems like all of those crimes may be indicative of criminal gang activity. But anyway, they are no longer in that list. AB 48. This was an important one. I think it affects the police department a great deal, particularly some of the things that we had during some of the demonstration activities that have occurred over the last 18 months. So it prohibits the use of kinetic energy projectiles. These are rubber bullets that are used in extreme circumstances to disperse unruly crowds, riot kind of situations. So you don't really want to use lethal force, obviously, to disperse crowds. That's not an option. So rubber bullets and other type of kinetic energy projectiles are typically the go-to on something like that if things get out of hand. Not any longer. And you can't use CN or CS gas either. So that really ties the hands of local law enforcement or public safety in general when you have situations that are escalating to a dangerous level. How do you stop it? How do you control a crowd? I'm not going to presume to know what the chief's plans are for addressing this if he has any yet, but we will have to look into that. AB 418 really no longer applies to us. It was vetoed, so it was passed, and then the governor vetoed it. It was a grant to provide $300,000 to cities, really to invest in solar, like power resiliency, so PV, solar, batteries, things that if the city hall or other public facilities were involved in a forced power outage, they would have the ability to generate power and remain open. In our case, we're exempt. So in the case of a forced power outage, we're considered an essential facility, and so we shouldn't experience that if a forced power outage happened. And anyway, the grant is not available because the bill was vetoed. AB 339 required us to, would have required us to continue to provide telephonic and internet-based options for public comment until 2023, the end of 2023. That too was vetoed, so we don't have to do that. AB 816. This is on page 2. It requires us to submit to the Department of Housing and Community Development a plan to specifically, with benchmarks, to specifically end homelessness in the city by 90% by 2029. And it also allows the Inspector General of the state to bring action against the local agency if we don't comply with the plan, or if we're out of compliance with whatever plan we adopt. Ironically, some of the reasons for homelessness are kind of as a result of state action. So it's kind of hard to come up with a plan to reduce homelessness when we really can't do what in other cases we've done in the past before various state laws were passed. So it's going to be something that we're going to be required to look at. AB 89, this increases the minimum qualifying age for police officer candidates from 18 to 25 unless the individual has a bachelor's or otherwise advanced degree from a college or university. And then SB 2, this is the one we were looking at. It was important. It is important. It passed. It was signed by the governor. It's the one that, under certain conditions, eliminates qualified immunity for police officers. Again, this will be something that the city attorney's office will want to look at very closely moving forward with certain policies and procedures within the police department for responding to certain conditions.
So which one was that?
That was SB 2. And then finally, again, relative to police officers, SB 16, this involves the disclosure requirements of various activities. So, for example, anything involving unlawful searches, any type of prejudice or discrimination alleged, I've detailed it in the summary, but anything involving unlawful arrests, searches, taking people into custody, again, discrimination against protected classes, those are all disclosable now. So we need to maintain records with regard to that. They can be requested of us, and we would have to disclose the specifics of that event, including the officer's name and all of those involved. So that's another very important piece of legislation that was signed by the governor. And those are the ones I wanted to highlight, both vetoed and signed. And for example, the one that didn't make it through, thankfully, didn't even get vetoed, didn't even make it through, was the one about the super commission that can overrule your decisions on development projects. If a developer came here and you denied, he appeals to the statewide kind of super committee, and they can overrule your decision. That didn't go anywhere, but I would caution, I would just say, as we look forward to the next term, those type of things are going to come up again. Some of the things that came off this list, no doubt, will come up in the second session because they weren't withdrawn, they didn't die. They'll come back, they'll be revitalized. Some are already through committees. So there's no question that we're moving into an era here where it's kind of the state has taken a position of one size fits all. And it's happening in land use. It's clearly attempting to happen with regard to how police conduct themselves. We need to be aware of some of these type of initiatives as they come forward. So with that, I'll address any questions if you have any.
Questions? Gary?
Yeah. Is like a water cannon considered a kinetic weapon?
I don't know. I would defer to the police chief on what the definition of a water cannon is. I wouldn't want to go there because of the connotations from and the 1960s film of that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't want to go there. I wouldn't advise that.
What are cops supposed to use? Rubber band guns?
That's my question too.
Was SB 16 talks
Yes.
about disclosing any kind of prejudice, or that's a very subjective kind of thing. How do you quantify that?
Well, presumably, and I would probably have to look deeper into the law or defer to the city attorney, but presumably if discrimination were alleged, there would be an investigation on the alleged discrimination and some sort of proof that discrimination occurred to a protected class. And once that incident had fully resolved itself, that is what becomes disclosable after the incident is fully proven that discrimination happened.
I suppose, but even that process of making a determination
Right.
is completely subjective.
It could be.
So one department may have a completely different criteria for that than another.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome.
The next, we just did that. The last administrative report, item 11, is a redistricting process and census update, and I'll ask our staff to tell us about this.
Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. I'm here to provide an update on the redistricting process, the current district map, public hearings, and recently received census data. Following the presentation, I'll be seeking council direction with regards to some next steps. As a general recap, in 2016, the city residents passed Measure S. The measure transitioned the city from an at-large election process to a district election process for city council members. The mayor remains elected at large. To develop the new district map, the city held 4 community workshops, of which 125 people participated, over 160 maps, 21 of them unique, I believe, were submitted. The map was ultimately adopted in June 2017, and I should note that the map was developed using 2010 census data, which is supplemented by 2017 demographic estimates. So redistricting is the process of adjusting city council voting districts to ensure that each district has substantially the same number of residents. Cities with districts are required to redistrict every 10 years following the centennial census data release. Each city must have, or I should say courts have held that an equal population must be less than 10% deviation from the lowest to the highest council district populations. The state recently adjusted or released their adjusted census data on September 27th, 2021, so we just received this information. So when the city was going out for redistricting consultants, we asked for pricing based on 2 different scenarios. The first scenario was if the districts remained balanced and the city was not required to go through the full redistricting process. The second scenario was if the districts were out of balance, and you can see in that image where the numbers don't match up, and the full redistricting process would be required. And it's important to note that council has the option, regardless of the scenarios, to proceed with the redistricting process. So part of today's discussion, part of the question I'm going to ask the council is whether or not you would like to proceed from scenario 1 to continue through the redistricting process. So the city's redistricting consultant, NDC, or the National Demographic Corporation, processed the recently released census data for the city's current district election map. NDC found that the city's current population deviation, that's the difference between the lowest populated district and the highest populated district, was 5.35%. And of course, that's below the threshold of 10% variance, which the federal law requires for equal population. So legally, therefore, the districts do not need to be redrawn to comply with the federal equal population requirements. In other words, the city's districts remain balanced. The Fair Map Act requires that we host 4 redistricting hearings. These hearings have been scheduled on July 14th, September 8th, November 4th, and January 22nd of 2022. Staff recommends that the City Council continue with all 4 hearings as scheduled and continue gathering community input to ensure compliance with the Fair Map Act. Just as a brief recap, during the second public hearing, we heard from the community in general terms about the geographic area of the Middle Eastern community of interest as Broadway to the north, Hamashaw and 2nd Street to the east, Washington Avenue to the south, and Magnolia Avenue to the west. A second decision point today will be whether the City Council would prefer to purchase an additional online mapping tool called Maptitude. So Maptitude's a bit more powerful than the tool that we have online right now, which is District R, but essentially will provide the same mapping functionality just with a little more granular data so you can analyze a bit deeper. So that'll be one of the questions I come back to the council to ask about. The city currently offers several mapping tools on the website, including District R, as I just mentioned, which is an online interactive mapping tool, paper maps supplemented with Excel spreadsheets, and currently the city's accepting map submissions by email through the redistricting website and in GIS format. So now I'd like to transition to the census results. I've taken some broad points that I kind of want to bring forward to the council. I printed out, and it should be distributed on your desks, the paper printout with all the census from 2017 and 20. So if you were looking for any of these points, you should find those there. So this first one is kind of an interesting table, as it shows a growth rate by district from 2010 census to the 2020 census. This table is interesting because it shows that the districts are still balanced, as you see, but that it's not because they haven't grown, it's because they've kind of all grown proportionately. So they're all growing districts, but still kind of balanced because they grew in the same pace. Since 2017, the population has grown relatively proportionally across all districts, as I mentioned. This next slide overviews the deviation in elections or in election districts between 2017 and 2020. So you can see in 2017, we're about 4.64% deviation when we adopted this map, and now we're about 5.35% deviation, which of course is still below the 10% threshold. Here you can see the total population from 2017 to 2020 census based off ethnicity. And this slide overviews immigration in El Cajon. And then this slide shows various languages spoken at home. While the census doesn't capture a Middle Eastern population or residents that live here in El Cajon, we can use languages spoken as at home as kind of like an indicator of our Middle Eastern population. Of interest, other languages has grown 4% overall from 2017 to 2020, as you can see here. Of particular interest, this category in District 4 has increased from 26 to 34%. As you'll see in District 4 there. So given the districts remain balanced, staff is seeking your direction tonight as to whether to submit our current district map and not proceed with the full redistricting process, or to proceed with the full redistricting process regardless of us being in scenario 1, if you will. And then secondly, whether or not you'd like to purchase the additional mapping software, Maptitude. Collectively, if the council elects not to proceed with this redistricting process and mapping software, it would potentially save up to $30,000. And with that, I would like to turn it over to council for direction on these 2 points.
Let's first see if there's any questions. Questions? All right, no questions there. Well, I don't know how you all feel about this. To me, there's been little change. I like the map that we have because it's cuts the city into 4 fairly equal parcels, and I don't see a need to change it. Open discussion.
So I understand that the Arabic community is requesting a much different scenario from the information that I received, correct?
I don't know if you want to clarify. You mean the information that I sent earlier today?
Right.
Oh, okay.
So, like the map guidelines, and then you had a slide there that just gave the parameters that they wanted. So was there much of a change in that particular population in that area? I mean, did they move more more closer together into that area from from the earlier census?
I mean, it's my understanding, and I don't want to speak for the Majdaw Center, but it's my understanding that they surveyed their community members and took that data and put pins in a map to determine what the best district shape would be. Without paying NDC to go forward with the full analysis of the maps, we don't know precisely what that demographic will look like in that specific district.
Given that information that they have given you already, how does that compare to the prior census?
I think we don't know. So we received the map today. So
I know, but did we not have maps last time?
we did, but we don't know how closely this aligns with previous maps.
Yeah.
Nor does there have been some minor shifts, so we're not sure how that would match up with the 2020 census data. I think one of the questions that we're going to ask, or that Mr. Richards has asked, is if we were to analyze this map in depth, we would need that additional software and the services from NDC. Now, staff can use the current mapping tool that we have and draw just general populations, but we won't be able to slice the data and look at ethnicity and all those things without the assistance of a demographer. So the question is, we know we have the capacity to look at these maps just from a pure, does it meet the within the 10% population, but we can't tell you how many registered Democrats or Republicans are in each one, how many, what's the average age of each district, all those things that the demographer can provide. That will cost the extra $20,000. So that's the question being posed today.
So Mapitude is $20,000 more?
Well, the Mapitude's $10,000, and that's just the service for the map itself. But to hire the demographer, NDC, that's $20,000 to really dive into these maps and continue to be at our beck and call.
But I thought we already had a demographer.
We did, but remember, we have a contract. It's a two-parter. Okay. Part one is up to kind of this point to determine, look at the new data, determine if our existing map is within 10%. They've done that. So now the question is, do we want to use their services for part two, which would be to analyze any additional maps that come in, and that's the $20,000 additional.
Okay. I'll hold additional questions for the Module Center.
Any thoughts? Thank you for reminding me. Is there any public comment?
Sir, yes, we have one card from Rama Awad.
Hi, come on up.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Rama Awad. I'm the programs manager at the Majdaw Center. We're the Arab Community Center of El Cajon, just on East Main Street. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak today. I wish I could have brought more community members with me, but unfortunately this conflicted with school pickups and work. But I'm here representing about 300 families of Middle Eastern background, Arabic-speaking population in El Cajon. So today, as I've been hearing, you're deciding whether or not to take the current map from 2017 or proceed with the full redistricting process and redraw the lines, redraw the map. I came specifically today to urge you to pursue the full redistricting process and to urge the NDC to create additional draft election district maps for consideration. For your consideration and for the public's consideration. Over the past few months, we have been mapping our community to compensate for the lack of representation in the census data. So as you saw, there's no category that says MENA or Arab. So we're not really present in the census data. Even if the 2020 census data reflects an increase in population, it's still not conclusive, and it still doesn't tell us where our community is or how many we are specifically. So if we're to use the 2017 map, we're going to continue leaving out major portions of our community of interest, specifically in districts 2 and 4, where the majority of our community's reside, go to school, work, own businesses. As you all know, state law requires that we keep communities of interest together to the extent that the populations in each district are proportional. And so based on our mapping efforts, which we submitted this morning, we're showing that our community would be better represented if we adjust some of the boundaries of District 4 and District 2. So just one example to your question about what are the differences. If we look at District 4, there's a shift that we're proposing that extends it to the east and to the west and kind of pushes the lower segment to District 1. The reason for this being is that we know that many of our community members live in apartment complexes in those parts of District 3 and District 1, whereas the lower segment of District 4 are mobile homes and trailer parks, and that's not where our community is currently living. So we can say with confidence that based on our mapping work, that's where our community is located. And you can follow a similar trend with the other districts. It just depends on what part of the map you're looking at. So what you'll see in the map we proposed is the blue lines follow the previous map, and the shaded sections are what we've done to map our community. So in short, what you'll find is that our community mapping efforts do substantiate that you pursue the full redistricting process and the redrawing of the maps. And again, I urge you to follow suit so that we can be sure that we're drawing the most accurate maps that will impact the next 10 years in terms of local politics here. So
thank you. Question for you.
Yes.
Steve?
The maps that you drew, we need to integrate those into the mapping software to know the populations of each of those 4 districts. I don't know if you know how to do that yourself or you're going to need assistance from staff.
Yeah.
But that will be key.
Right.
Because the populations have to be balanced.
Yeah. I myself am not trained in GIS or mapping software, but we've been working really closely with a demographer. And so what we've presented actually is within the deviation range. So, for example, to the east of D4, we would have liked to include actually more of I believe D3, but we had to make the call because including more of that would have meant we were over the population proportion. So we did do some of that arranging and said, we'd rather this section where we know there are huge apartment complexes or businesses owned by the Iraqi community. So that was some of the back and forth that went into the making of the maps that we submitted.
Sounds good. In the census, both in the 2017 map based on 2010 census and the 2020 census, there's a section language spoken at home. English, Spanish, Asian, and other. Other could be Somali, could be Afghani, could be Farsi, could be Aramaic. What's your opinion on us using the other language as one measure of the Middle Eastern community in El Cajon?
That's a great question. So as someone who's been working with the community, we often do have to piece together different sources of data to make sense of where our community is, and language is a huge indicator. I think of the 18%, you're right. It could be Arabic speakers, it could be Farsi, it could be Afghani. These are very different communities with very different histories. But I will say that I think what unites this other category is socioeconomic background, and that is a major factor in how we define a community of interest. So you'll find that certain segments of the Arab community might have more in common with community members, the Persian community members or Afghani community members. So for us, it's more of like, what are the basic needs and how do we define a community of interest? So you could say that the 18%, does include part of our community, but also community members of other ethnic backgrounds.
Okay.
But we don't know, right? We don't know what that 18% really reflects.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead.
I'm not really sure how to say these things, so I want to make sure that I'm being sensitive. Currently, right now, with the maps that we have, how are we not meeting this community of interest? How are we not meeting the needs of the Arabic community when, yes, we have districts and we represent each district, but we also, if someone from say, Councilmember Ortiz's district were to contact me and say, hey, can you help me? I would help them. We represent certain districts, but in actuality, we represent the city as a whole. How are we not meeting their needs now, currently, with the maps that we have?
Thank you. I think one of the major reasons why we're involved in this process is because we've identified a community of interest, and we're advocating for that community of interest to be maintained in one political district. And for us, that's really important because we want to be able to advocate for policies that impact our communities. And I think oftentimes it's also about political representation. It's about being able to unite as one community and have a political voice. And I don't think that that's really the sentiment here, and I think, or the sentiment that the community holds. And I think redistricting is just one piece of that. I don't think that this is the end-all, be-all solution, but it is a necessary step to make sure that the political map reflects where our community is. And so what we proposed actually isn't very different from what the 2017 map suggests, but there's enough of a difference to substantiate for you all to pursue the full redistricting process.
So do you feel that they don't have a voice now because they have no representation on the council now?
I think that's part of it.
So wouldn't, wherever district they live in, wouldn't it behoove them to put a candidate forth when it comes to elections? Wouldn't it be helpful for them to put forth a candidate, because they would be able to vote on that candidate? And I'm kind of confused as to what benefits it would bring to the Arabic community if they had their own district and their own representation. But if they're currently not putting forth people to represent them, how is changing the lines going to make that difference?
So here we're talking about, I think, voting power, and currently we're not in one district to garner that voting power. So that's really the impetus behind pushing for redistricting. But I think it's also, we're thinking ahead to the next 10 years because these maps are going to inform the next 10 years, because this is only done every 10 years, right? And yeah, I think it's also related to, you know, you're asking me why hasn't the community put forward someone? And
I'm just
frankly
curious.
speaking, I think the community is really struggling with basic needs, making ends meet, affording rent. Housing has been a huge crisis over the past year, if not beforehand. So I don't think that the community's priority right now is civic engagement. But that's the role of a community center like the one I work with.
Sure.
Because we want to promote that sort of civic engagement amongst our community, but it's just frankly not a priority where they're trying to make ends meet right now. So that in part I think answers your question.
Okay, because the reason why I ask some of these questions is in my district, around the corner, I have, well, on Mollison, there are several Arabic families that live in that area. And if you make that one district that had been proposed as that one voting block, how do they get a say in the matter, because they don't live in that voting block? They live in my district in 2 up north, Mollison by Bradley, and so they don't have a voting, you know what I mean, a voting block. If you make it just the center of the city, as you had proposed.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious how what rights do they have, or how do they get the same support as those that are in the same block? Because I like the diversity in our city, and I like the fact that it's spread out, and we have, in my neighborhood, I have everybody in my neighborhood, and so, you know, I kind of like that. But I'm just wondering, you know, what benefit is it going to be if you put everything into one district, and if they don't have representation from the Arabic community on the council, what changes? Does that make sense?
Kind of. I mean, I think I think the maps are imperfect. I think even if you are to redraw a new map, there's no way that the new lines will account for every single person that we identify as part of our community of interest.
Right.
Because there's not the data, and also because of certain practicalities and the proportions of the population that need to stay intact, it's likely that some of our community won't be included in the new lines. But the best we can do is try to unite as much of our community within the same political district, and that's why we're involved in this process. So it's going to be imperfect, but I think that opting to not pursue the full process does more of a disservice than adopting the current map. So that's why, again, we're urging that you all move forward with your initial plan and pursue the full process, because a lot of it is we don't know. And I think it'll take a demographer, like the one we've been working with, to really look at the data and try to glean, okay, where is this COI that we've been talking about for the past few months. So
Well, thank you very much for answering my questions. I'm not trying to grill you or anything. I just want to know more. It's like, how does this benefit everybody? Because making the decisions up here and whether we go for a full redistricting process affects everybody. And it does, it has an impact on the entire city and not just one community or another. And then I just kind of wanted to know what the benefits are, because I don't know. So I appreciate you answering my questions.
Thank you. Yeah. And if I could just add, I think that a lot of the families I work with are new refugee, new immigrant communities. And I think they're one of the more marginalized communities, not just in El Cajon, but across San Diego. And so I think they have a lot to gain from having proper political representation and being able to advocate for policies that affect their day-to-day life. So I think the stakes are really high for us, and that's why we've been so engaged and wanting to be part of this process.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the council. Steve.
So a question for staff. We're still required to do 4 community outreach events. We're still required to hold a public hearing, I think, at a council to adopt the map. So we're not cutting anything short, are we?
That's correct.
Okay. What big leap would this additional mapping software give us that we don't have today?
So, according to NDC, I spoke with them at some length today about the software. Maptitude doesn't have additional categories over District R. What it has is additional layers. So if you're looking at income, District R may show a color-coded map of census block statistics for $75,000 and above versus, or below, versus Maptitude might say 75, 55, 45 on down the line. It's just got more layers to it. It's also got, if we proceed, it'll have a lot of our specific city information, such as where schools are located, where parks are located, just more of that information. So it's just more stuff, but the underlying data is going to be a lot the same.
Okay. I don't know that gives us anything, a huge leap to say, wow, that really shines a new light on something.
I think it might if we had seen a big change in the data, but things basically stay the same. So you're probably right that it probably doesn't really give us anything else.
Yeah, I think we should go through the full process as required to. If we keep the same map as today, District 4, this is very interesting. District 4, in the original map in 2017, was 31% non-Hispanic, English-speaking white. And it was 26% other language. It's flipped. It's now 34% other language and 22% non-Hispanic, non-Middle Eastern white. So under the current map, if we accept that the Middle Eastern community is the dominant group in other language, it is now the #1 group in District 4 by far. 34% compared to 22 white, 28% Hispanic, Latino, and down from there. So it's going to be a tough bar to beat, to say, man, there it is right there. That is a majority Middle Eastern district, number 4. But I will keep an open mind as we welcome other maps drawn.
I have a question for staff. This whole redistricting has been in education since I haven't been through it. I know some of my colleagues have, but it's my understanding that a community of interest can also be defined as people living on a corridor, so the 8 freeway and things like that. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's something that I feel I have seen in my district. For example, the traffic, we just had an issue come to City Council with regard to traffic on Chase. And the residents on Chase consistently are saying traffic's crazy, traffic's crazy. So that's a community of interest that we haven't heard about yet. Same with Washington. It's the same main corridor thoroughway. So there's an element that we haven't addressed and heard of that I hear from residents frequently. South Magnolia is another one. We put it on a road diet to allow for parking. I've heard from residents that it's fantastic. So I don't want to pigeonhole our conversation into one area of thought. We have to think also of these main thoroughways we have in these districts where issues do arise. We had a young Middle Eastern man, 18 years old, killed on Anza because someone was going 80 miles an hour, and we put a stop sign, and we managed the traffic there. So there's other elements other than there's other elements to communities of interest that I don't think we want to ignore. And I do think we do need to continue to take communities of interest into consideration with regard to background, ethnicity, which country they came from. But I don't want to ignore that other element as well, because I think all residents share those same issues, and I think we need to keep that in mind.
I have a question for staff. Graham, so you brought to us the options of proceeding with the maps that we already had at this point. Why did you bring that to us now and not after this last hearing?
Because we're at a jumping point where we have the analysis on the current map, and we knew that the data would be made available through the middle of this process, and we wouldn't want to wait till the end and say, oh, by the way, we've run through this, oh, by the way, our maps are all balanced. So we wanted to get you the information about the maps being balanced because the data has recently been released by the state. So that's really the intent. But with that, now we have the question, if we have a balanced map, do we need to go that next level and continue to hire NDC to analyze additional maps? So you can continue to take additional maps. And in fact, staff would encourage you not take. You should encourage additional maps to come forth. However, the question is, does the council want to spend $20,000 to analyze those maps in a deeper way than just they're evenly population balanced?
So is there any benefit to making a decision at this point to just accept the maps as is?
That's not on the agenda. That specific item.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's not to accept it, but to provide direction.
Correct, because you still have to go through a public hearing to accept that map, and you have to go through 2 additional public hearings per the Fair Maps Act. Yeah. So there's still the need for 2 additional hearings. We think we would recommend at hearing number 3 is we actually dive into the data. I mean, we skim the data on the surface tonight, but really dive into the data to see how the data has changed from 2017 to 2020. That would really be the intent of the next meeting. And then depending on where that goes, then that will help dictate where the public hearing we go. But that's why we're here tonight, is we have the data now to share with you of what the current map looks like. Where we didn't have that before, 3 weeks ago, we couldn't have told you that.
Okay. And so it seems to me that the real value is in having staff be able to explain it at these public hearings so that people can understand it.
But we want NDC to still be able to allow the public to submit their own maps with tweaks. That's no additional cost?
So they can continue to, and Mr. Richards, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone can submit a map still, because we have that mapping capacity. We've bought that District R mapping solution. So people can continue to submit maps to us. Based on that, there is the ability for them to analyze, is it balanced? What NDC would provide us, the demographer, is they would give us kind of this level of detail for each of the district maps that are provided. That's what would cost us the additional $20,000 in consulting services.
Okay. Well, so at what point can we make the decision whether or not we want to delve into the point where we're spending another $20,000, $30,000 to have additional maps?
That's what we're looking for direction tonight. Do we want to spend? We can accept additional maps with data at a high level, or do you want data at a very detailed, sliced by all these different factors: ethnicity, language spoken at home, gender, political affiliation, voting habits, all those. If you want that level of detail, then we'll need to secure the assistance of NDC.
When you say that level of detail, you mean something more than what's on this sheet of paper we currently have?
No, it would be this sheet of paper for each possible map. So you would, right now the mapping solution would just give you, if you look at the very first column, 2020 census data, that's what you could do. So if Councilmember Goebel presented a map and you have a new District 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's the level of detail you would get. You wouldn't get voter turnout data. You wouldn't get language frequency or fluency. You wouldn't get that level of detail if you were to submit the map on District R. But we could get that level of detail if NDC continued to serve us.
Yeah, I need clarification. I thought we got that 4 years ago. I thought that all these fields we got from NDC 4 years ago. All these fields.
We got them, but not for every single map. So when we hired NDC a couple years ago, they did an analysis, a page, for example, for each map submitted.
For each, 4 years ago, for each of the maps submitted. Okay, so that's different. You paid them to analyze each of the maps submitted versus having the software to automatically do it for you and not having to pay them to do it.
Correct, because the software only looks at the high level.
Yeah.
It doesn't dive deep into the data.
You're asking us to, okay, 20 to 30,000 to license that software. What did you pay NDC roughly 4 years ago for them to analyze the maps that were submitted?
I don't know. Do you remember what we paid them?
I would say to walk us through a similar districting process. So the first time we developed districts, it was 4 public hearings and the same process essentially where they analyze submitted maps. That cost about $50,000. So where we're at currently is we've probably expelled about $20,000 in contract or consulting expenses. We have another 30 in front of us. The real question is, do you want to forego that and stick with our current map, or do you want to go back through the process completely?
Okay, I think I'm understanding it now. I think we need to spend the extra money so that anybody who creates a map can have all this data. Is that?
That's the question.
That's the question.
Before the council.
If somebody creates their own new map, unless we buy the extra feature, they're not going to get this level of detail.
They would just get the number of people that live in each district,
okay.
The population.
I think we need to give the public this level of detail when they create a map. I think that's transparency.
I think I would disagree in the sense that the data hasn't changed. The number of people living in these districts really haven't changed. I'm pretty confident that we're going to end up choosing the map that we already have, and I don't see wasting the public's money just to pacify and make people feel better about the process. We're still going to take their maps and look at them, but we don't have to go into that kind of detail.
I would have a different opinion to say it's probably a good amount of money so that the public looks at us and says, we gave you every tool that you could possibly need in a transparent process. We didn't limit or cut you off at this point. I think the public would want that.
Other council members want to weigh in? Or?
You know, this is a tough decision because I think we owe it to the residents to have full transparency. And if we spent $50,000 4 years ago, and that's what we had budgeted this time, we might as well go ahead and spend the additional $20,000, $30,000 since it was already budgeted and have full transparency. Otherwise, I'm just afraid with the particular climate that we've got going on now, that it's going to blow back on us. And it's not, I don't care if I lose my district, because what I saw on the map, I'm just going to be transparent here. What I saw on the map, Gary and I will live, Councilmember Kendrick and I will live in the same district. So when it comes time for re-election, now we've got to go against each other. I don't care about that. But my point is I think that, you know, obviously the Arabic community has a valid concern. We also have a large Hispanic community, and we haven't heard from them, at least not at public meetings. And so I just feel like we need to be really transparent and have that available. But
I just want to remind you, though, that we went through this process 4 years ago, and nothing's really changed since then. And so
I agree.
So why I don't know why we want to go and do that again. But Phil, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think when we look at demographics, the large issue that our friends from the Middle East have pointed out is we're just making a lot of assumptions. You know, we can't identify, and the reason we're making assumptions is because on the census, we can't, these individuals can't denote which background they're from. And so it kind of seems like we're taking stabs at it, guessing games, because they're not able to identify which background they're from on the census. And to Steve's point, you know, District 4 did grow. What was your grew in District 4 by a Middle Eastern population? They're the dominant. They're the dominant group. I was speaking to Chaldeans though, and they're not the dominant group in District 4. They want the lines drawn a different way. So, with regard to spending the money, I mean, I don't know. I don't see it as a huge amount of money. I don't know that we're not going to do this again for another 10 years. I don't see this as a large issue to spend the money, and if we're going to go through the process, then it almost feels like let's go the whole way. So if we do receive maps, we can actually see what it looks like instead of just guessing. But I agree with you, Mr. Mayor, in that not a lot has changed, and so if it hasn't changed, there's not much we can. We shouldn't be changing it if not much has changed. So, yeah.
Gary, any thoughts?
Yeah, it seems to me that given the data that Councilmember Goebel pointed out in District 4, it seems like a lot of Middle Easterners end up there, and I think that would partially address their concern. I think that would partially address their concerns. I like the idea of continuing with what we have right now, just because there hasn't been much change. There's not any new developments that have come in the city over the last few years. And people remember what district they're in, because they'll come up to you, oh, you're District 1. You know, they remember, you know, who the representative is. And although I know that all of us get comments, you know, or emails from people in other, in other districts, and we all handle the problem. So I'm good with the map that we have right now.
Everybody's had a chance to speak. Entertain a motion.
I'll move that we spend the additional $20,000 to $30,000. How about put a cap at $30,000? Is that a better way to state the motion?
Can I ask the question? So the 20 would be to employ NDC for mapping. The question is, do you want to get the additional maptitude, and that's $10,000?
Okay. If anybody wants to submit a map, I want them to have this data. What does that cost?
That's NDC's services of $20,000.
Okay. I will move that we employ NDC for an amount of $20,000 so the public can get demographics on any map they create.
Anybody want to second that?
Is there Robert's Rule of Orders? Can I ask a question?
Of course.
When is the cutoff for submitting maps? Is there a cutoff for the public to submit maps? Is there a day that we have?
I mean, it's my understanding that the council would consider any submitted maps and make a decision on January 22nd during the hearing.
Okay.
I don't know, Morgan, if you have a different read on that, but we're required by law to adopt by April 17th, 2022.
Technically, that's the deadline, is the April date. The 22nd achieves the requirement under the Fair Maps Act that was adopted after we had the first redistricting issue come up, or did the districting to begin with in 2017. So you do have some flexibility. You do need to have the fourth hearing. It doesn't have to be the very last one. You could add another hearing, but that's the minimum required by the state law.
And so let's just say we get a flood of maps, will the $20,000 get us to January 22nd with regard to how much money we're designating to this consultant? Or
yeah, there's a flat rate to get us through the process.
Okay.
And so without getting too much into detail, the first flat rate was $4,500 just for if there's no redistricting required. Now it's $29,500. And so, and we spent a per meeting cost. So I guess that's probably too much in the weeds. But essentially, yeah, looking forward, there's 20,000 more would get us through January 22nd. If we added public hearings, there's some additional costs we'll have to consider.
We're not going to have a need to vote for additional funding for this to get us to the end.
Not unless you add public hearings.
All right, there's a motion on the table from Mr. Goebel. Would somebody like to make a second? All right. Moved and seconded. Please vote.
Motion fails with Mayor Wells, Mayor Pro Tem Kendrick, and Councilmember Ortiz voting no.
All right. Well, I'd like to make a motion then to direct staff to proceed with the existing map.
Second.
Please vote.
Pardon, just a second.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. We're not voting on a final map.
No, I think the direction would be: do we either fund NDC for additional consulting services or not? We still have to go through the public hearing,
Fine. Yeah,
and the council still has to adopt a map.
I meant that.
But this is the predication that this is sort of the base map that
That's
we're
what I meant by saying
contemplating.
direction. So yeah, I'll amend my motion then to not spend additional money on NDC.
I'll second that.
Please vote.
I'm sorry. We just voted not to approve it. Isn't that de facto not to spend it?
technically your motion failed, but you still need to take some action to move forward. You need some direction
To cement the action, okay.
It's moved and seconded. Please vote.
Motion carries by a 4-1 vote with Councilmember Goebel voting no.
All right, thank you. Thanks, David. There are no commission reports on today's agenda. Item 12 is my activities report and is as reported. We are now at activities reports of council members. Councilmember Goebel.
Mine's as reported.
Mayor Pro Tem Gary Kendrick.
As reported.
Councilmember Mitchell.
As reported.
And Councilmember Ortiz.
Yes, mine is as reported.
We have one joint council member report from Councilmember Ortiz, myself, and Phil, I will leave this with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, staff, for preparing this report. As we know, the census data came out, and I think it's important for us as a council to not only look at our city and receive maps, but also be engaged on a higher level with regard to congressional state seats. Currently, it's in preliminary phases with regard to these maps. So there have been a handful of maps that have been sent out by the CRC, the Citizens Redistricting Commission. They do accept public comment, they do accept letters, and so I think it's important for us to weigh in on the different conceptual maps that they have wrote, since we are losing a congressional seat. Population growth has declined in California. One aspect of that is understanding the existing boundary lines for current congressional and state seats, which from the initial maps are being broken up. Other communities of interest regarding water districts and high school districts are being broken up as well. Also, taking into consideration the region as a whole with regard to East County, urban, coastal, those are not being understood or even recognized. One map has Hillcrest, which is almost downtown, lumped in with parts of Santee. So I think it's important for us, well, the other aspect of it as well is parts of the Middle Eastern population are present in South El Cajon and in Rancho San Diego. I would think that should be represented as one district. That's being broken up as well as Asian communities in the Kearney Mesa district don't have representation. So all that to say, there's tons of examples of how communities of interest, existing lines aren't being represented, and so I think it's important for us to weigh in on this as a council to represent our constituents and have staff take a deeper dive into these new boundary lines.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out that the difference between this conversation, the conversation we were just having, was we're not leaving historic boundary lines basically in place. We're radically, the discussion is to radically change to lump East County in with Hillcrest and National City in some maps, and so it's obviously, in my mind, a cynical play to try to bolster left-wing power, and so considering a fairly conservative area, I think we should at least make our voices heard so that we do our best to try to stop that.
Well, the other aspect of it is urban and rural, and those lines, I mean, there's significant difference between an urban environment and a rural environment, and the needs and desires of those communities are completely different, and so I think that needs to happen as well. I don't know, Graham or any staff members want to weigh in on this as well, please.
So as a reminder, these are what are called conceptual maps that were just sort of floated out there to get some reaction, and but there is from what I understand, a plan to submit a more formalized map sometime in November. But I'll give you an example. I printed out these maps, And one district makes a lot of sense: National City, Bonita, Chula Vista, all the way to Imperial Beach. That's very clear. It's compact. It makes a lot of sense. But then you get districts that would include Fallbrook to the north and west of the map. It would include parts of rural Riverside County. It would go all the way down to Jacumba and include all the way out to Imperial County. So that would be a district. So you talked about the difference between rural and urban. Yes, but there are also some very distinct differences between North County, South County, and so this would be an odd one. I was paying attention to El Cajon. The one nice thing about at least the conceptual map, El Cajon is currently split into 2 congressional districts right now. It would be lumped into 1 congressional district. It would include, would not include Rancho San Diego as part of it, so it would split our Chaldean and other Middle Eastern community. It would include La Mesa, Spring Valley, Lemon Grove, and Southeast San Diego, but would not include, like I said, Rancho San Diego, and it would not include Santee. The map I think Mr. Ortiz made reference to would be a map that would include Lakeside and Santee, and it would cut across, include San Carlos. It would include all the way up to the 15, and then it would actually track all the way down the 15 to include parts of Kearney Mesa, and it would go all the way to Balboa Park, Hillcrest, and actually goes all the way to 32nd Street base along National City. So from the way the map looks, it looks like 32nd Street Naval Base is actually the boundary between the district that Santee would be in and then the South Bay one. So those are just some examples of some of the things that I don't know whether the commissioners don't understand San Diego County, but clearly I think the action before you tonight isn't to opine one way or the other, but is actually direct staff to spend some time to analyze it and track some of this, which will take some time, and I'll have to figure out how to reprioritize some of the things that the council has directed us to do, if this was the direction from the council.
I'd also like to ask staff to provide us some of their opinions on how we can best have efficacy with this, how we can make our voices heard.
Yeah, and if there's a map out there that, because I know there's a lot of community groups submitting maps that might, to search for those as well that represent these communities of interest, especially with our Middle Eastern population, with the idea that chicken farmer in Lakeside is being represented in the same district as someone on the coast seems a little absurd, and it doesn't really take into consideration communities of interest. It almost ignores it. So that would be my suggestion.
Yes, Steve, go ahead.
Graham, you said, you just made a comment that we might have to bump some other things that you're working on. What was that remark?
Well, I mean, we only have a finite amount of staff time. This currently is not on the work pill, so we'd have to look at how much time this would take. We are getting a new intern on board, so I think some of this work could be shifted to the intern. But this is going to be sort of Vince, me, or Dave Richards working on it, so we'll have to look at what we're currently got in the hopper and see if something needs to come out of the hopper.
Bill and Phil, what's your thought on the priority of this thing?
It's a pretty high priority as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we've got a real short window, maybe, month, 6 weeks before we have to...
Probably about 6 weeks before things start coming together at the commission level.
Yeah, so if we have any chance to make any kind of impact, we've got to get started right away.
And there's an end date 6 weeks from now is what you're saying?
No, their end date is similar to ours. Their deadline is in spring, but they're going to start submitting maps, and I think the concern is that once those maps start being published, and if they don't have significant feedback or useful feedback, those will become the de facto maps.
I guess my concern is what's going to get bumped. And if we had a goal-setting session in March where we reached a consensus, and if this is going to bump one of those consensus things, I'd like to talk about it, to say, well, wait a minute, we agreed in March that this was the slate for the year. What's going to get bumped? So
I don't know what the answer to that is.
I think I'd like to know when you know, because we should agree to that.
Then,
or I should say we should have a
discussion.
well, then I'd recommend that we re-agendize this. That would give us time to analyze how much time it would take, and then what would be pushed off in order to accommodate that time.
I'd support that.
Will it hinder your ability to move forward? Or?
We can direct our new intern to start some of the preliminary work, so that would not have an impact on our staff.
Sure.
Fine.
Let me see if there's any speaker cards on this item.
No comments, sir.
Okay. Then, all right, then that's the direction. All right. There are no general information items on today's agenda. There are no first or second readings of ordinances on today's agenda. We are now at closed session. The city attorney will recite the titles and lead us in the closed session.
Thank you, Mayor Wells. We're going to, City Council is going to adjourn to closed session for two items. The first is item 18, a closed session for conference with legal counsel on anticipated litigation. Initiation of litigation is being considered pursuant to paragraph 4 of subdivision D of Government Code section 54956.9. There's one potential case. In this matter, while it's not identified, Councilmember Mitchell will need to be disqualified, but she will announce that before we go into closed session. Item 19 is a closed session for conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to paragraph 2 of subdivision D of Government Code section 54956.9. The description of the potential or the threat of litigation is as stated in the agenda report.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn to closed session.
Second.
Please vote.
Before the vote, Ms. Mitchell, would you like to disclose your disqualification, please?
Yes, I have to recuse myself because I live within 300 feet, I believe it's 300 feet of the situation.
And what we will do is take that matter first, allowing her to participate, and then she will leave the meeting.
Fine. All right, you need us to revote?
Do I vote? Oh, okay.
All right, let's move in second. Please vote.
Motion carries by unanimous vote.
What happened in closed session?
Thank you, Mayor Wells. Sorry, I was stuck trying to keep the door open. The City Council met in two items in closed session. Councilmember Mitchell participated in the first item, which was item 19 on your agenda, and that had to do with the threat of litigation against the city of El Cajon, and direction was given to the city attorney and to city staff on that one. In item 18, with Councilmember Mitchell disqualified and not present, the city council gave direction to the city attorney on that matter.
Thank you, Morgan. All right, this brings us to adjournment, the adjourned regular joint meeting of the El Cajon City Council, El Cajon Housing Authority, successor agency to the El Cajon Redevelopment Agency, held this 26th day of October 2021, is adjourned until Tuesday, November 9th, 2021 at 3 o'clock p.m. Thank you.